Hey everyone, my name is Diego. I'm the growth marketer here at Lemonlight, and I'm here with Kean Bartelman, our actually creative director at Lemonlight. He took some time out of his busy day to talk to us about Modular Creative. It's a creative format that has been pretty popular. I've been hearing it a lot more on sales calls, even internally in the office. And I know that it's actually coming from Kean's kind of more philosophy of creative strategy, and he's kind of been pushing it really internally, and clients are loving it. It's a great creative strategy for today's modern type of digital advertising with multiple different channels and so on, but I don't want to actually talk about it too much. I'd rather actually come from the person who has been pushing it so much. So before we actually go into like the tactics and the strategies of how to implement it into your creative strategy, first, do you want to talk about what it is exactly?
You know, the whole idea of modular content, modular creative, was really derived from working in the social media space and really having to stretch the legs of content as far as you could possibly take them, and make, you know, things that felt unique, but also things that could be used for A/B testing, you know, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, all over the place, right? Now that we have so many social media platforms specifically, but also paid media platforms, you know, CTV, STV, all these different placements these days, you can't really just rely on one concept, one video, one commercial, because if you do, you're gonna run into ad fatigue at a certain point in time, and it's gonna be relatively quick, probably within a couple weeks, and then you've kind of just wasted a lot of time, energy, and effort on this single campaign that doesn't have a lot of legs. So the way that I've kind of thought about this whole idea is, how do we quite literally create a long shelf life for a single production or a single concept, a single idea, so that we can service these different placements, whether they're organic social channels or paid social channels or streaming TV, broadcast television, right? How can we get the most content that's usable, that's diversified, out of one idea to basically have it run on all of these places, right? So that's kind of where the idea comes from. And then obviously, you know, a lot of our clients, they're coming to us with this need for, you know, hey, I need content for Amazon, for my Amazon page. I also need content for my my organic social media, and then I also need content for, you know, Meta ads or TikTok ads or YouTube pre-roll ads. And usually they have one sort of scope of work, one budget to do all of that within, right? So from a creative standpoint, it's thinking about how can we derive the most interesting, the most unique content out of a single shoot, out of a single idea, to then facilitate the use on those platforms.
Yeah, so usually I remember hearing it more of like, a video is cut in three parts. It's the hook, which captures the attention. It's like the first 3 seconds. Then it's the meat of the actual video, like what are you trying to say, the value that it gives, and then the last part's the call to action. Like maybe it's book a demo versus book a call versus book a meeting. Like let's test to see which is the one that people like, or what is the hook that gets people's attention and pulls them in. But that's a very basic approach to this type of like modular, because the whole point was like, all right, now you have 5 different hooks with 3 different meats with 5 different CTAs, and you could just mix and match, and you can create a bunch of different content from this one technically video.
Yeah.
But yours is a different approach to that. Can you explain how is that different?
It's different in certain ways, but it's also very similar. The idea is telling a larger story through smaller moments in time, right? When you have a more traditional sort of linear storytelling narrative, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And in order for the viewer to understand, you know, the end, and specifically in advertising, which is typically the call to action, you have to watch the entire thing, right? And if you remove the beginning, the middle doesn't make sense. If you remove the end, there's no payoff, there's no call to action. So the idea here is that we're creating small moments in time that can be stripped out from the overarching sort of edit flow and used as standalone short form pieces, or be used as sort of Lego pieces, is kind of how I describe it, and mixed and matched through the edit to create different variations, unique versions, A's, B's, C's, whatever it may be. So, you know, it really depends on what the project that we're working on is, what the client's needs are. You know, one example is a project that I recently finished, which is AAA. And we did 3 30-second spots and then a 60-second spot for their life insurance category. And when we started this project, they kind of came to us with, hey, no one really knows that we offer life insurance. Everyone knows us as roadside or auto insurance. And we really need to tap into that market. And they came to us with a sort of personas and demographics breakdown of who those consumers were, what they looked like, how old they were, what stage of life they're in, right? And for me, it was particularly relevant because I just went through this process myself. And so I could understand the perspective of a certain part of their demographic, right? And so to me, I wrote some creative around that specific persona. Well, that was not the only persona that they needed to reach. That was not the only demographic they needed to connect with, right? There was, the younger folks who are coming out of college, and it's sort of, looking at it as like an investment opportunity, setting up their financial future, right? The other persona was, me, smack dab in the middle, and then there was a somewhat older persona as well, and they needed a message that, spoke to all of those folks, right? Well, it's very difficult to do that in a linear format. Right? You have to show a lot of people, you have to have a lot of context, you have to make it all make sense together.
It's also multiple different stories.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not, the different demographics are not existing on the same distribution platforms where they're going to view the content. They're also not just living the same type of lifestyle, and maybe their values are completely different, right? So, if I were to write a content for my persona, then I'm alienating two of their other core personas, right? So how do we bridge that gap and bring it all together in one video that can kind of serve as the hero and service all personas? Well, the way that we did it is we broke it out into modules, right? And so the hero edit is comprised of different scenes that are derived from the 30-second heroes that are persona driven, and it brings it all together in a way that it makes sense visually, and the message remains the same, and the actual message is pulled in bits and pieces from the 3 unique videos to make this kind of bigger picture, top of funnel spot for the main 60-second hero. So that is kind of how I often think about these things, is how do we show viewers, meet them where they are, really, that's a big component to this, but how do we show viewers something that they're going to recognize immediately and sort of understand the context without having a lot of context? And then how can we tell that big story, which for AAA was, hey, life insurance is an important investment for young and old, right? It's an important part of adult life, and they needed to message that across this like broad spectrum of folks. So that was, how we kind of structured this in a way that we could accomplish that, and therein lies kind of the power of this approach, is that you're able to say a lot, but you're able to say a lot through short, small kind of moments in time that can then also be used as their own separate sort of content on social media, or as a paid Facebook placement, or as a YouTube 15-second like pre-roll sort of ad. Like all these vignettes, all these modules can exist by themselves, but can also support a larger narrative that tells a much broader story.
Yeah, because I feel like modular content is a big reason why it's so important is because of the distribution plan. It's like now, before, the more traditional approach, the more linear approach was, we know we're just going to run this on TV. We were talking about this before. It's like back in the day when you were watching commercials, you didn't have anything to distract you while the TV show ran on commercials. Nowadays, it's a commercial. For one, if you have the option to skip, you immediately skip it in 5 seconds if it doesn't capture your attention. Or if it's something where it's like, all right, for the next 30 seconds, you have to watch commercials, people just whip out their phones and then they just start watching other content. So now you really need commercials or video content, whatever it is, for any type of platform. So I guess the question for you is, when AAA came to us, did they have a distribution plan in place? Like, what part of the process did they come to you with? Like, hey, this is the stories we want to tell, or whatever. Did you like straight up just come at it from scratch? Like, we're going to use a modular approach. This is what it is. Like, I guess the reason I say that is because, do people have to come to us or to come to you already with a well thought out plan? Or did you just like straight up create it on your own?
For that particular project, they kind of came to us with exactly what I said. They were basically like, hey, Everyone knows AAA as roadside. Some people know that we have home and auto, but next to nobody, and our data says this, knows that we offer life insurance as well. And so we need to get that message into the marketplace. And then beyond that, we need to tap into this younger sort of audience, but we also need to, reach these other folks that are, searching for or seeking those sorts of policies and those sorts of plans, right? So outside of that, they really leaned on us creatively to come up with a way to, reach all of those folks in a compelling way.
It's like, no, clients don't need to come to us.
Yeah, so clients don't really need to come to us with anything specific, anything set in stone. What our jobs are is to come up with creative ideas that meet their needs. So long as they're coming to us with a need, that like AAA did, where, hey, we need to get this message into the marketplace and these are our sort of demographics that we need to communicate with, then it's, our job and our ability to, work within that to create content that meets those needs. And my goal and our goal is always to create as much value from a single production as we possibly can. And this framework allows us to do that, right? From these single day shoots. So we did 3 days of shooting and we created 3 unique 30 seconds, a 60-second hero, as well as a bunch of stills and a bunch of cut downs and a bunch of aspect ratios. And so from these 3 single days, we were able to derive a significant amount of content that can be used kind of across the board and for a long period of time, rather than kind of putting all of our eggs into a single project basket and hoping that it doesn't fizzle out or experience ad fatigue once it's actually used in the market. So,
yeah, I think also too from a media buying standpoint, what sucks sometimes is when you do have a really good video, but it fatigues and you have to just create an entirely different one, and then you have to go through the entire production process over again. Sometimes, like, what I always find struggle with is you shouldn't create content when your content is already fatigued. You should always be proactive, so when that moment comes, you already have backups in place, because then you're just going to be scrambling trying to find something to, again, that works. So this is like an approach.
For sure, and all of this stuff ultimately just comes down to how you're developing your concepts, right? How rich, how varied, how interesting, how dynamic is each individual vignette, each individual module, each individual scene, and are they strong enough? Are they realistic enough to be recognized without needing any sort of establishing context or any sort of lead up or build up, right? And if they are, then you're able to kind of build this bigger, sort of more robust narrative that also, like I said, can function on its own. That is the entire goal of this entire process, is how can I create stories and narratives that people can connect with, see themselves in, but also do so in a way that you don't need to know their intimate details of who that person is and still kind of relate to it. And then those little bits of imagery can supplement all of these different placements, right? And it just really gives us the opportunity to tell more vibrant, more interesting stories. And the next layer deeper is tailoring those sorts of personas or vignettes or actions or scenes, whatever you want to call them, to where they're going to be used, right? Like the audience on broadcast TV, as we all know at this point, is not what it once was, and it's most certainly not the same audience that exists on YouTube or on TikTok or on Twitch or Instagram, right? Like all of those places have very sort of niche, specific audiences that you have to develop content for, and kind of speak their language and really meet them where they are. Otherwise, they have the option and more than likely will just scroll on by, right? And so that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to meet as many people in as many different places as we can, from one sort of big idea or one sort of big production.
Yeah, and then I think something that we've been talking about, which is like a trend, we even did like a landscape report with just like a bunch of video stats that we got from a lot of our customers, and something that people are saying is that like marketing budgets are getting cut. You know, you get less money to create content, but you need more content. So
yeah, there's more places to put it.
Yeah, there's
right?
more, exactly. Yeah.
And beyond the fact that there are more platforms that you have to be active on, the audiences on those platforms are becoming smaller and more specific and more niche every single day. And it really kind of, and then I guess the trifecta, the tip of the triangle, is that there's so much content being posted every single day. There's so much content just
noise,
exactly. So you're trying to meet your brand loyalists or your consumers on the platform upon which they exist, and also get in front of them in this kind of maelstrom of just digital noise. And that requires quite a lot of creative content, or just repetition of output, which if you're kind of deriving the same images from the same project constantly, not only is it going to fatigue, but it could negatively impact your performance kind of across the board, right? If there's no engagement on it, it's going to get served to fewer folks, which means that it's doing a lot more harm than good.
Yeah, I think I remember the first time I ever heard about modular content was when you were pitching. I was watching like sales calls for like just customer research, and I saw you pitch it to Sprouts. And then just seeing how that video came out, I was like, man, now I see the strategy behind how this production, whereas most people, or even before, when I would just see that on TV, I'm like, oh, that's just like a commercial video production, But it was done in a very strategic way. I can't wait for the AAA one to go live and to see that one. I've seen like clips of it that you showed me on your phone, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, the whole idea is how do we tell as much of a story as possible? How can we be at the same time broad and specific? The Sprouts sort of concept, the reason that we approached it in that way is very similar to AAA. We had to speak to a variety of lifestyles and how the brand could support those lifestyles, right? So there was dairy-free, there was gluten-free, a couple other lifestyles that we were sort of focused on. And so rather than try and lump it all in to one video and one 30-second spot, which is essentially 9 to 12 frames, not a lot of time. The approach was, let's structure this in a way where each individual video is following the same visual format, so that when we bring them into post, we can mix and match the visuals for each of the lifestyles in a very sort of holistic, well-rounded representation of what the brand is trying to communicate, which is essentially, we have great food, great ingredients that are, organic, sustainable, all that stuff for almost any type of dietary restriction or lifestyle, right? To say that in a sort of linear way would be very limiting, right? Because that is the message right there, right? And so what we did was we just tailored these unique scenes, but also very relatable scenes to those specific folks, to the individual versions, and then brought them all together in the hero edit, which then, we called it the supercut. We could have made a variety of supercuts simply because we could have mixed and matched, 101 with 202, 303, and moved them all around in an edit to make a kind of an endless variety of edits. And then on top of that, we're able to derive those unique scenes out of those 30 seconds and out of the supercut to make social content, aspect ratios, different types of things that really fund or fuel their organic and paid efforts.
Yeah, and I think people now, I guess, would understand what the concept of modular is, but we were talking about it even before too. Even though the foundation is still the same of what modular is, the approach for every video is going to be different, right? Every project, every persona. So I guess if you're going to start a project, what are the questions you start asking first? what are like the thought process that initially start to kind of get you the idea of like what's unique about this specific project and how we're going to execute the modular approach?
It kind of always starts with target audience, and it starts with what message, like what hero message are we really trying to communicate, right? That's always going to be unique to every brand, to every project. And then from there, you know, my approach is always identify that message, identify the target audience and what actually resonates with that target audience. What actions do they actively participate in, or do they actively take? Like, what does their day-to-day actually look like? One of the things that I think that a lot of, you know, I'll lump myself in with this, a lot of like the collective we of marketers in general, what we get wrong is that we are often really close to whatever it is we're marketing, right? Even this conversation.
It's the curse of knowledge.
Yeah, even this conversation is a bit in the weeds for the, you know, objective onlooker, right? And so I try to always approach at least early stage creative development from like the average everyday consumer. And what they actually care about, and what actually drives them to make a purchasing decision or to become a loyalist of that brand, right? And then once I have that kind of web weaved together, then I start saying, okay, because this person lives this lifestyle, enjoys these types of things, I'm going to put them in this environment doing this particular action, and that environment and that action should be recognizable by anybody who views it. It should not be specific to, you know, that persona in a way that only they are going to understand it or relate to it, right? It's got to be big, it's got to be broad, but it also needs to be, you know, like realistic, authentic, specific to that persona. And then from there, you know, once I have that sort of big idea and the big message kind of linked up, then it's just a matter of structuring the visuals in a way that are repeatable. So, you know, I'll go back to AAA, right? We had, you know, the young professional out of college persona. We had the kind of young adult, like millennial persona. And then we had this caregiver persona who was kind of like in the middle of a multi-generational family, right? And so what I did was figure out what those people like to do, and then across the board, every single establishing shot was executed the same way. Every single subsequent shot was across all three of them was executed the same way, so that when it came time to making the supercut, there's a clear and established flow across all three videos that can be weaved together in a way that feels normal and natural. And then for that one specifically, I also scripted the voiceover and the audio to be able to function across the hero edit in tidbits pulled from their unique 30 seconds.
If you have a complicated product, market it in a simple way. And if you have a simple product, like a shoe, for example, market it in a complex way. That's why when you see ads, it's like, oh, this shoe has aerodynamic, we use space grade, stuff like that.
Because everyone knows what a shoe is.
Exactly.
And so you have to differentiate yourself from every other shoe.
Yeah, exactly. Because in the mind of everyone, a shoe is a commodity, or a lot of these simple products are more commodities. So it's like, all right, how do you make it more valuable? The perceive, and that's something that another term you coin here is make it look expensive. Like
I can't take credit.
That.
I can't take credit for that one, but that is one of my sort of like creative philosophies just in creating anything in the visual realm is because, like perception is reality. And no matter if you're a startup brand or, Nike, right? Everyone wants everything that they put into the world to be perceived by their audience as a value add to their lifestyle, right? And so that whole phrase is a very simplified way of thinking about what the final product you're putting out into the world looks like. And when we're talking about it in the realm of production, and when I use that terminology with like our DPs and gaffers and art folks, like what I'm actually saying, and they all understand this just kind of inherently, and when I say it, they all kind of like smirk and scoff and think it's silly because it is, but it says a lot. Like, focusing on composition, focusing on lighting, focusing on camera dynamics, and making sure that everything does have that level of sheen, that level of polish, that level of intention is really kind of at the crux of all of this, is like doing things with intent. Because when you match very sort of precise language and messaging with very precise execution of visuals, you get that outcome, which is that things feel very polished and thoughtful and commercial, and then they are perceived as such, right?
Yeah.
So that little phrase has served me well for a long time, and I just kind of operate from that place of like, if it doesn't look and feel, whatever we're making, if it doesn't look and feel expensive, like we have to figure out how to get it to that place, because that is, ultimately what you're trying to do, at least in a commercial space, is present your brand, your idea, your product to your consumer, your target audience, as a value add to their lifestyle.
I think the perceived value of that is the important part. Like perceive, it's all about going back to like the modular approach. Everyone has a different perception of the value of what AAA would offer them based on their own life experiences, and that way you can create a video where you can talk to all of different quote unquote perceived values, all the different personas. And really, if I were to simplify it, it's just like a cost-effective way. Because now it's just, you're doing one video, cutting it up in multiple different ways to tell the same story to multiple different, well, not the same story, but just like stories to like all the different personas that they're trying to target, without having to do an entire production for each different persona.
Yeah, it's really just about meeting people where they are, and that kind of that means a lot of different things, like meeting them where they are in their life, right? You, myself, we're in different parts of our lives, experiencing different things, and so we care about different things, right? And yes, like I may value life insurance in this particular example differently than you do, right? And so it's, how do we reach both of us with a singular sort of creative concept and approach, right? How can you understand the perceived value of that product the same way that I do, even though we're at different stages of things, right? And then the other component to it, which we've talked about, is meeting consumers where they are digitally.
So when you're talking about all like the different platforms and different channels, it's not just different channels, but it's also the different devices as different aspect ratios. So how do you shoot a modular type of video while taking into consideration, like, this is not only going to be cut in different ways to make the same video, but also in ways that it's going to be a 9:16, a 16:9, and all the different types of aspect ratios that are on the
so
platforms.
I think, I approach that from like kind of two perspectives. There's like the tactical, like on-set execution, how are we actually going to make sure that this works in both? And then there's also the creative side of things, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there are certain shots where you're going to you're not going to be able to force a 16:9 into a 9:16. But sometimes you're able to get creative with how you are able to execute that just based on what the shot is, right? For example, with the AAA project, we had someone riding a bike through downtown LA, and we had these big, wide, beautiful shots like facing her from the perspective of like her handlebars, right? Well, just based on that shot alone, it's not going to fit nicely into a vertical frame. However, the motion and the action and just the speed and the dynamics of it make it very compelling to look at in that vertical format. And so there's always a time and place to make sure that your frame fits perfectly in a vertical context. But then there are also instances where sometimes actually breaking outside of that mold is a creative decision that actually serves your edit better, or your concept better. As far as like the on-set tactical execution thing, we're shooting with guides and shooting wider than we may normally shoot in a more like traditional cinematography perspective, just to give ourselves the real estate. But there's a lot of cool things that are happening now with like AI tools and stuff too, where we can generative fill stuff to like give ourselves some more on-screen real estate. and different things like that. But generally speaking, the goal is that the actual vignettes, like the core creative concepts, are purpose built, designed with intent to resonate on social in the same way that they do on a client's website or on a YouTube pre-roll ad or on streaming TV, like wherever that placement is. And that's always kind of a part of our, we talked about discovery earlier and asking questions, like that's always a part of our discovery too, outside of who's your target demo, what message are you trying to communicate. We're also, one of the first questions is like, where are you planning on putting this?
Yeah.
And if they tell us everywhere,
Yeah.
That is sort of a cue to me to be like, okay, we have to think about this in sort of like Lego blocks, and assemble something that we can pull those like 6-second scenes out and put them on Instagram Reels, and they're going to do great. But they also, put in sequential order in a 30-second hero edit are also going to do great, and they're going to make sense, and they're going to support the message, because at the end of the day, that is what matters, is linking up the visuals with what we're saying, and doing so in a very thoughtful way that is designed with intent to basically derive as much value out of a single shoot as we can.
Yeah, because in the media buying space, that's where my background is mainly. I'm only focused mainly on the distribution side of things. And I was building out a campaign the other day in Google Ads, and I saw that even they have internal kind of tools to kind of do the aspect ratios, like by generative. I don't know how much I trust those right now. I feel like it's still very early. Yeah. But I just think that is a concern always from when media buyers are talking to their creative teams, like, we need these videos, but they just tell them we're going to run it on Facebook. But Facebook is so much. Facebook is Facebook Stories, Facebook Reels, in feeds, like a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
Could be 1x1, could be 4x5, could be 9x16, could be 16x9.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic if all of these tech giants would standardize an aspect ratio for us, but that's too much to ask. But I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is always make something that's really strong. Yeah. Make something that's really good, right? And when it comes to make something that's good in the terms of marketing content, a lot of times what good translates to in practice is, did we catch someone's attention? And sometimes the perfect frame is not what's going to capture someone's attention, right? And that's where we kind of get back to like, a little bit of like creativity in the way that we're framing things and editing things, like, cutting off someone's face. Like if there's a lot of like dynamics happening, a lot of camera movement, interesting location, interesting lighting, interesting lensing, like the combination of all the on-set production elements, if they come together in this way that creates a frame that maybe isn't like, looking exactly like it would look in the widescreen, so long as it catches a viewer's attention, that's what really matters at the end of the day, right? And so the way that I just think about a lot of that stuff is, kind of the modern commercial production trends of the day are like, put the camera in weird places, capture weird perspectives, or I guess unexpected perspectives, right? And try and really put the camera in the action and in the places where people are doing whatever it is that they're doing, rather than, the cinematography way of like, get your wide, your medium, and your close-up. Going back to the AAA example, like, we adhered a camera to a Le Creuset, Dutch oven for a shot. We put the camera on the back of a bike, on the front of a bike. We followed a bike around town, shooting kind of like car to car. We put a camera on the back of a vintage Mustang and drove through, the city at sunset. We put the camera inside of a suitcase. Like, we really wanted to like make the viewer kind of have that like, almost like visceral experience, as if they were like in the action, really to draw that sort of like engagement and like compelling sort of visuals out, to get them hooked in, right? If you keep things moving, you keep things dynamic, you keep things interesting and unexpected, that's what I would argue in this day and age translates to good.
All right, so you say like the message is really important and how you communicate it. And I think marketing is all about the right message to the right person at the right time. And I think when it comes to time specifically, we had actually a lunch and learn a couple of months back. I think I gave it to it, but it was speaking very similarly to what you were talking about in your lunch and learn around simple creative. And it's about, where is the person, not only you're targeting the right person, but what level of awareness are they? What are they at? Where are they at in their buying journey? Are they considering buying a product that's in your niche? Have they not even considered it at all? How do you bring them into your funnel? It's not just about the video, what you were saying, like the tactical side of production and like capturing their attention from like the actual shoot, but like how do you capture them based on where they're at in their journey from the buying standpoint?
Yeah, I think that it always depends on the type of content you're making, depends on who the person is and exactly like where they are in the funnel, right? And you have to tailor your visuals and your messaging to that person in that place. When we're talking about sort of like, top of funnel brand awareness plays, one of the sort of like central creative philosophies that I try to preach and abide by is this idea of like simplicity. Because when you're trying to bring someone new into the fold, right, they're completely unaware of you, your brand, your product, or maybe they're aware of you, but they're like,
sometimes even the category itself, they don't even know that that's the type
exactly.
of like thing.
And so you can't obviously like launch at them with like the nitty gritty and
like
like the in the weeds sort of details. You have to speak to them at this very, very sort of high level. And you have to make it so simple that they can get it right away. And so this idea of like simple creative is this kind of mix between economy of words, right? Saying what you mean, meaning what you say, being very uncluttered with your word choice so that it can quickly sort of resonate with whoever's watching it. And then using that verbiage to guide the visuals that you're putting together is the simplest notion of CSAY, right? But if you can combine very, very clear, this is the problem, this is the solution, these are the core benefits and features of this product that meet that problem, and you show it like very clearly and precisely, you're able to kind of tap into those folks in a much more useful way and get them to like really understand what you're doing and saying, and get them a little more interested. If you come at them with things that are too specific or in some cases too broad, they're probably going to scroll on by.
Or too many.
Yes.
Because that's something people want to say everything in a video.
You can't be all things to all people all the time. You really, and again, that just kind of comes back to the simplicity of messaging and making sure that the words that you're using are the words that you mean to use, and the things that you're communicating are exactly what you mean to say, exactly how you mean to say them, because if they're not, what you're trying to communicate gets lost.
Yeah.
And as soon as that gets lost, no matter how pretty the picture is, people bow out, they go elsewhere. There's so much, and this just comes back to the idea of like oversaturated platforms, and they don't have to watch anything that you're making. So you got to give them something of value, and you got to lower the barrier to entry for them to get invested, right? And so simplicity of message matched with simple, precise, clean, sharp imagery is kind of the fastest path into building that sort of brand awareness, or at least piquing people's intrigue, right? The biggest brands in the world do simple the best.
Apple does it.
I think we all immediately associate them with like, clean, simple messaging and imagery. From the onlooker's perspective, it appears that way. On the production side of things, it's definitely none of those things. But it's so clear, and it's so sharp, and it's so refined, and they know exactly who they're talking to, and they know exactly what those people care about, and they know exactly what words and pictures to show them to get them bought into their ecosystem, right? And that's why you have people like myself who have Apple laptop, Apple Studio,
AirPods,
iPhone,
yeah.
all the whole ecosystem, right? Because they've made it clear, they've made it easy, they've made it clean, simple. And that's just kind of like a core philosophy of theirs, even down to their hardware design. But when simplicity is done well at a very high level, it's very, very effective.
Yeah, I think from what I remember, Apple really launched them was it was the computers, but they also got into the iPod space, MP3s. But they weren't the first company to actually do an MP3. It's just that the other companies
There's
that
like a
first did it,
Zune and a Sony thing.
But the way that those companies marketed it were like, it's 4 gigabytes, it's this. They talked all about the specs of what they would get from the technology. Whereas Apple just came in and they said 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Black silhouettes dancing with white earbuds on a pink solid. It's still like to this day an iconic piece of creative that is kind of lives in everyone's collective conscious.
It's like culture at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just a shining example of like a simple idea executed at a very high level that didn't mince words. As a matter of fact, there was no voiceover in that spot, if I recall correctly.
Like it was music playing,
and people dancing, right? And the contrast of the white headphones against the black silhouette was really striking, and ultimately really effective. And I can give you a laundry list of their other ads, print and otherwise, that have essentially done the same thing. I think we all know, Mac versus PC as well.
Yeah, think different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just is proof positive of when you have a really good understanding of who your target audience is, what they care about, where they're consuming content, and what type of content, what type of words to use to connect with them. Like that's what makes things work. It doesn't need to be complicated. It most certainly, successful content also, especially in this day and age, doesn't need to be singular, sequential, linear, whatever words we want to use to describe it. It just needs to be interesting, and it needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be able to function in this like very vast landscape of platforms where everyone that's on each platform is different and cares about different things. But we still have to kind of get them to care about whatever we're showing them on each of those things, regardless of who they are.
So for anyone who's watching this, I think they now understand, the approach of modular content, the philosophy behind it, how people are even applying it in the real world through our projects, or even the old concept of simplicity through some of the stuff that we talked about with like Apple. But what are like the next steps someone could actually take to implement this type of modular approach to their content strategy?
I think the first step in any of it is identify who you're talking to. Try and figure out what motivates them to make, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, make a add to cart, any sort of action. Like really try and understand what that is, and try and understand, where specifically like the hero platform would be that you're targeting, because we all know that everything goes everywhere. But most folks have
this is pillar.
This is for YouTube ads, or this is for, like you said, like Google ads, but it needs to work everywhere. But identify what those sort of core elements are. Once you do that, then it's really about building kind of a persona and building actions that represent or feel relatable and authentic to that persona, and making sure that they are so clear and so recognizable that you don't need to establish anything. It's building small moments and literally joining those personas in the act, right? We don't want to spend time basically where time is literally of the essence. Like you have 3 seconds to really get someone to watch or not
before they skip.
We don't want to spend that first 3 seconds establishing a location or doing
or transitioning the logo into the thing.
or doing character building. We
just cut to the chase.
We got to get into the module into the story, into the vignette, and do so with such clarity that, the test that I used to use was like, would my grandma know what's going on?
Yes.
Like that.
It's like the website design. Like you
Yes.
sit your grandma in front of the website and be like,
Yes.
hey, grandma, like
Figure it out.
Like,
Yeah.
what does this company do?
Exactly.
That's how you know your copy and everything from a site. Like, hey, if you want to find services, where would you go?
Exactly. So you have to make it that clear, and then figure out within that clarity how to capture different moments in time. And that can be, from day to night. It could be day, a sequence of days, whatever works for the message you're trying to communicate. But you're really just trying to build moments in time that can be kind of arranged in any number of ways and still contextually make sense, and support the message, right? So identify the persona, identify the sort of hero platform, identify the core message, and then build visuals that support that message with each word, each sentence that you're saying, and do so in a way that is just super clear and relatable regardless of who's watching, right? It's all about building a scalable sort of format, a repeatable format to where I can apply the same methodology to any story or any persona, because it's just building out little moments. And so long as those little moments feel real and feel compelling and dynamic, that gives you what you need to have things that can kind of work on their own standalone content, be rearranged sort of iteratively in a hero edit, make cut down, like all the stuff that all these placements require. You're able to do that if you are separating each scene into their own kind of corner, basically, and not making them have to connect or kind of work in a sequential order.
I'm sure we're going to see more projects come in from this type of approach. And yeah, just appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. If you want to learn more on how to implement this type of creative strategy into your own content and work with our team, feel free to just go to lemonlight.com.